Hello, John Hively here. Today is the second episode of my YouTube channel, which I call the John Hively Show. We talk about politics. We talk about, give in-depth analysis of things such as Supreme Court, fantasy stories that have robbed trillions of dollars, tens of trillions of dollars from the lower 99% of citizens and handed it right up there to the top, the billionaires. And so today we're going to look at the Citizens United decision. And in that decision, the justices violated the Constitution 8 times at least. I think there might have been 9. I kind of have lost count. They also violated U.S. law at least once. And then they violated reality numerous other times in order to rationalize giving their billionaire friends, bribers, and benefactors vastly more constitutional rights and political rights than you will ever have. And today we're going to cover 3 of the times that the justices violated the Constitution in Citizens United. So let's go with number 1. Among the many fairy tales, the justices wrote in their Citizens United opinion, yet certain disfavored associations of citizens, those that have taken on the corporate form, are penalized for engaging in the same political speech. With this, the justices declared that all shareholders of U.S. corporations were U.S. citizens, a leap into the world of fantasy way beyond anything in reality. So let me tell you the story about how I came to this point. I'm reading this, I was reading a couple years ago, the majority opinion. And I came to that sentence, and let me read it to you again. Yet certain disfavored associations of citizens, those that have taken on the corporate form, are penalized for engaging in the same political speech. So I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, geez, I trade stocks. That's what I do as a hobby, and to earn a few extra bucks. And then I'm thinking, that's just such a fishy sentence. I owned shares of Volkswagen, Sony, and other foreign corporations. Why wouldn't foreigners own shares of U.S. corporations? And so I Googled it. I think I Googled the words foreign shareholders, U.S. corporations. That's it. And I did it within 20 seconds. It brought me to the Tax Policy Institute and an article about the breakdown of foreign ownership or complete total ownership. You know, who owns all the U.S. corporate shares? And it turns out in 2010, 44% of U.S. corporate shares were owned by foreigners. So that sounded really weird. Now the breakdown also goes like 25% of U.S. corporate shares are owned by foreign individuals and 19% are owned by foreign governments and foreign businesses. Among the businesses is the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, which owns shares of Uber, Lucid Motors, and other U.S. corporations. Now, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund is an arm. It is part of the Saudi government. So what did the Supreme Court do by saying all shareholders of U.S. corporations are U.S. citizens? Somehow they decided to make the government of Saudi Arabia a U.S. citizen. So let's go over how that violated the Constitution. Now I'm going to read over here the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It reads, the very first sentence, it reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Now, you can't tell me that a foreign individual who lives in France, Timbuktu, Nepal, China, Japan, South Africa, Algeria, the Congo, wherever, you can't tell me those people are citizens of the United States. Most of them are not. There are probably a few that have dual citizenship, sure. And you can't tell me that a foreign business is a citizen of the United States, that that they were born or naturalized in the United States, or that the Saudi government was born or naturalized in the United States, and that foreign individuals are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? And the answer is they aren't. So there is the first time that I noticed that the judges violated the Constitution. They're giving foreign individuals, because they own shares of U.S. corporations, citizenship rights. Then let's take a look. I'm going to read again. The second time that I noticed they violated the Constitution is Article 1, Section 8. It reads, "The Congress shall have power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization." Congress. Congress is the only one that can decide who is besides the 14th Amendment, who is a citizen and who is not. The Supreme Court has no authority, no constitutional or legal authority whatsoever to grant anybody citizenship rights just because they hold shares of U.S. corporations. Oh, and let's get to the third time. The third one I'm going to cover. And remember, they violated the Constitution at least 8 times in the Citizens United decision of January 2010. So the third time they violated the Constitution, it's real simple. The 11th Amendment forbids foreigners from using the federal government to sue state governments. Foreigners, in order to sue state governments, must use state courts. So, for example, in the state of California, if some foreigner wants to sue the state government of California for some law they've enacted or whatever, they have to use the state courts. They cannot use the federal courts. So U.S. corporations cannot actually use the federal courts at all. Unless, of course, you say something stupid, like all shareholders of U.S. corporations are U.S. citizens, which is a fantasy, pure and simple. Now, why would the justices do this? First, they rolled back the Citizens United ruling, rolled back the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2001 and the Tillman Act of 1907. Those two acts, those two pieces of legislation have withstood numerous Supreme Court challenges over the course, well, in the case of the Tillman Act, years, decades. And those two acts, Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act and the Tillman Act of 1907, greatly suppressed corporate participation in terms of campaign contributions in federal elections. But that wasn't the big reason they lied. They created a fantasy, the Supreme Court justices, that is, because it really doesn't matter much, those two laws, when taken into perspective. What really mattered is the foreigners, the foreign shareholders, because here's where the important point, the really important point. The Federal Campaign Commission on its website lists U.S. laws, and one of those laws is no foreigners can interfere in U.S. elections in any way, shape, or form. So with their foreign shareholders, U.S. corporations could not provide, they can't take part in federal elections. They simply can't. It's against the law. So that's why they did it. And it helped the justices' billionaire friends, bribers, and benefactors. And let me tell you something about the Supreme Court. For over 200 years, they've created these fantasy stories. And the only time they've really allowed democracy to exist in this country, because the Supreme Court has always been a democracy suppressor, except for the years 1937 to 1969, after FDR, President Franklin Roosevelt, brought them under control by nominating candidates who actually cared about the Constitution to the Supreme Court. Anyway, so that's the show today. Please, let me tell you one other thing. Somebody in Seattle recognized that the Supreme Court had created this fairy tale. And so the Seattle City Council in 2020, I think it was January 2020, 10 years after Citizens United, they voted to prohibit any corporations that had foreign shareholders of over 1%, I believe it is, if any foreign individuals owned over 1%. And I think if there's a 5% if any like entity, non-human entity, like a business or a government, owned 5% or more. They prohibited those corporations from taking part whatsoever in elections having to do with the city of Seattle. So I'm not the only one who's seen these fantasies, although I think Seattle could have done better. Anyway, this channel is going to expose a lot of stuff, a ton of stuff, like how the wealthy use their Supreme Court granted fantasy rights to rob you of $65 trillion. The bottom 90% of people have been robbed of $65 trillion since 1975 or 6. And then, of course, the Supreme Court has helped the billionaires rob Social Security Trust Fund of $7.5 trillion. And so we're going to deal in those type of issues. I think the next show will be about, well, besides covering other fantasy stories by the Supreme Court and the corruption of the United States government, it is now an oligarchy and has been actually probably since at least 1981. And if it wasn't in 1981, it was certainly in transition. And when Bill Clinton signed the NAFTA into law, that's the moment it became a complete oligarchy, if it wasn't earlier. So we're going to cover a bunch of this stuff, and we're going to cover how the corruption and the politics works. I think in the next episode, basically, we're going to cover how people and corporations purchase government favors and judicial favors in those markets. Yes, the Supreme Court is in fact a market, just like the United States government is a market. How many city governments are markets. People, anyway, I'll go into that tomorrow. You guys have a good day. Please share, like, and share, like, and spread and subscribe. I knew I could get that word, subscribe. But also, I've got a battle plan to roll back all the corruption, and I'm building the foundations of it now. So it would be really cool if you could press those buttons, subscribe, like, and share. If you could press those buttons, it would be really awesome, because people need to know what they're up against, and we're not being told by the United States news media what we're up against. I mean, none of them told you that the Supreme Court has violated the Constitution for over 200 years in order to give the wealthy vastly more constitutional rights than you will ever have, allowing them to rob you of your money, and also suppressing democracy for you, but not for the wealthy. Anyway, our next show should be in the next day or so, and you guys have a good one. Thank you very much.